My name is Sophia Johnson. I'm 33, and I've always been the quiet anchor in every storm. My life has always been small, deliberate, meticulously ordered, a sanctuary of spreadsheets, quiet evenings, and the soft purrs of my cat, Pascal. I love building custom mechanical keyboards, arranging every switch and keycap just so, and savoring the subtle hum of productivity. Most people would call it boring. I call it serenity. Mark Martin entered my life like sunlight breaking through clouds. At 35, he was ambitious, endlessly charismatic, and a lifestyle influencer with a devoted following. His energy was a whirlwind I secretly craved. He had this way of making ordinary mornings feel like a production, smiling at his camera while sipping coffee, turning everything into content, every nuance of life documented and curated. I admired it, even envied it a little. We had been together for 18 months before I moved in. At first, living with Mark was intoxicating. I loved watching him work, the meticulous way he arranged his ring lights, set up backdrops for videos, and made even mundane routines feel significant. I thought maybe this would balance my quiet, structured existence. But slowly, things started to change. It began with the small things. My favorite graphic tees were too sloppy, my keyboard hobby was clutter, and the way I brewed my coffee was embarrassing. At first, I laughed it off, thinking he was teasing, but then he started correcting me with a clinical precision, not as a joke, but as a mission. "This needs to be optimized," he'd say. And in his eyes, I wasn't a partner. I was a project, an experiment. I tried to resist internally, telling myself I was overreacting, but the signs were undeniable. Our living room, once a calm refuge, had gradually become his studio. My cat, Pascal, was now a prop, draped in beige throws to match his aesthetic. My sanctuary felt invaded, and yet I questioned whether I was being unreasonable. Then came the synth. I had been saving for years to buy a vintage analog synthesizer. It was expensive, yes, but every dollar represented careful planning, delayed purchases, and quiet sacrifices. When I finally ordered it, I felt a quiet triumph, a personal victory in a world increasingly defined by other people's rules. The box arrived one Saturday afternoon. I was thrilled until Mark walked in, his face a mixture of shock and irritation. "What is that?" he asked, like I had dragged something grotesque into our pristine space. "It's the synth I told you about," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I saved for it, and it's finally here." "It's huge," he said, frowning. "It doesn't match anything. Where are you going to put it? It's going to ruin my backdrop." I suggested my office, the spare bedroom. His eyes narrowed. "No, that's where I plan my new podcast setup. You can't put it there." We argued for an hour, compromises flitting like shadows across the floor. Finally, I agreed to fund a weekend spa retreat for his friend Zara in exchange for keeping my synth. The math didn't add up, but I wanted peace more than victory. I set up the synth in my office and felt a spark of joy I hadn't realized I'd been missing. This was mine, my choice, my space, my little rebellion against the constant shaping of my life by someone else. Then the betrayal came online. During lunch, a friend from college sent me a TikTok link. My stomach dropped. Mark had filmed himself in my office, posing around my synth like it was a prop. His fingers pointed at me and then at himself, mimicking a training complete gesture. The caption read, "When your girlfriend finally acts right after you optimize her life, #final performance, #training complete." I stared at it, my pulse quickening. My personal triumph had been turned into content, a public spectacle, proof that I was trained. My heart sank, a hot chemical shame settling in my chest. All the compromises, all the corrections, all the small humiliations now had a name, and an audience of tens of thousands. I didn't react immediately. I sat on the edge of my desk, Pascal curling into my lap, and thought about 18 months of subtle manipulations. Every tiny critique, every unsolicited optimization, every compromise I made for the sake of peace, they had been recorded, curated, and displayed for the world to see. Something in me clicked. Not anger, not revenge, clarity. I realized I had to reclaim control, reclaim my life, piece by piece. That night, I lay awake listening to the city hum outside our window. My sanctuary had been invaded, my quiet life upended, and yet, amidst the fear and frustration, a quiet resolve formed. I would not be a project. I would not be a performance. I would find a way to reclaim my world without losing myself in the process. I closed my eyes, Pascal still purring softly, and for the first time in months, I imagined a life where I could decide my own boundaries, my own space, my own choices. Living with Mark was like living inside someone else's carefully curated Instagram feed. Every corner of the apartment reflected him, his brand, his aesthetic, his life on display. And somewhere along the way, I realized that I had stopped being Sophia Johnson, quiet data analyst and lover of structure. I had become another accessory, another piece to optimize. It started subtly at first. My keyboards, once arranged just so, were too noisy, too cluttered for filming. Pascal, my patient, fluffy cat, was draped in beige throws and propped in the background for aesthetic shots. My office, once my sanctuary, had become a stage. And then came the TikToks. Mark had a way of twisting reality without confrontation. He didn't yell or demand. He performed. I watched one afternoon as he set up a ring light and framed my synth like a prop in his latest video. He gestured toward me, smiling at the camera, fingers pointing, a playful, training complete flourish. The caption read something like, "When your girlfriend finally gets it right, had final performance hashaja life optimized." My stomach sank. My personal joy had been stripped, polished, and broadcast. I felt that hot, chemical shame I had read about but never experienced, like everyone was watching me fail at being myself. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I stewed, letting the tension coil tighter with each passing day. The compromises started piling up, each one a moral dilemma. A wardrobe tweak here, a rearranged shelf there, a little optimization of my spending habits. I rationalized them at first. He's just trying to help. He's not malicious. But deep down, I knew it was something darker. One morning, I tried to brew my coffee exactly how I liked it. Mark appeared at my shoulder, leaning in, inspecting the cup. "You measured that wrong," he said, frowning. "It's inconsistent." I froze. Every instinct screamed that this was ridiculous, but a whisper in my head reminded me of the TikTok. The world had already seen me wrong. And so I smiled, nodded, and quietly remade my coffee. That afternoon, I found myself scrolling through his follower comments. Some were innocuous, compliments, jokes, but many praised him for training his girlfriend. I realized I was becoming a public spectacle, a symbol of his control. And worse, I had no control over the narrative. I retreated into my office, my safe corner, my synth humming softly. Pascal jumped onto my lap, sensing my distress. I stroked her fur, trying to anchor myself. "This isn't real life," I told myself. "It's just a performance. But I will find my way out of it." The breaking point came unexpectedly. Mark wanted to film a new series, a morning routine optimization segment. My synth, my beloved synth, was in the way. "Move it," he said casually, as if asking to borrow a cup of sugar. I don't want to," I whispered. It was mine, my accomplishment, the one thing I had saved for and built for myself. He tilted his head, a faint smile playing at his lips. "Sophia, you know how this works. Compromise. Life optimization." I felt a spark of defiance. No, but I didn't act. Not yet. Instead, I agreed to move it temporarily, secretly vowing that this would be the last time my passions were sidelined. I set it up in the corner of my office, out of sight, and turned back to my work. Yet that night, the TikTok notifications started again. New clips of me, smiling politely, pretending to enjoy the rearrangements juxtaposed, with captions praising Mark's cleverness. Training is hard, but she finally gets it. I closed my laptop, heart pounding. Every compromise, every small surrender had been documented, curated, and shared. The betrayal was slow, surgical. I realized I wasn't just frustrated. I was being dismantled piece by piece. But a thought rooted itself in my mind like a seed. If he could weaponize my life for content, I could weaponize evidence to protect myself. Receipts, screenshots, timestamps, emails, everything could be proof. Every subtle manipulation he had inflicted was recorded, consciously or not. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself a private smile. I wasn't powerless. Not yet. That night, as I stroked Pascal and stared at the glowing lights of the synth, I made a silent promise. This project ends on my terms. The storm was coming. I could feel it. But I was ready to fight, not with anger, but with clarity, patience, and strategy. It happened quietly, almost imperceptibly, but by the third week after the TikTok incident, I realized I could no longer coexist with Mark as he had reshaped my world. My apartment was his stage, my cat a prop, my passions trivialized. Every compromise I'd made, every subtle optimization, every adjustment to make him happy, it had become my cage. I sat at my office desk, Pascal on my lap, the soft hum of my synth filling the room. I watched a video Mark had just posted, another life-optimized clip, this time framing me as the obedient partner who had learned her lesson. His smile was calm, charming, practiced. My image, my voice, my autonomy, all weaponized for content. I felt a clarity I hadn't known before. It wasn't anger, not really. It was focus, a cold, precise understanding that my life could no longer be dictated by someone else's camera and whims. The first step was cutting digital access. I blocked Mark on every platform: Instagram, TikTok, WhatsApp, even my phone. The notifications ceased. The constant performance, the curated reality, gone. Next, I moved through the apartment with methodical precision. Not angrily, not vindictively, but with careful calculation. I packed his 3 expensive hard-shell suitcases, the ones I had bought him at Christmas, birthdays, and anniversaries. I folded every shirt, packed every gadget, neatly labeled boxes with chargers, cords, cameras, and ring lights. His aesthetic throws, supplements, yoga mats, gratitude journals, and all his staged content props were carefully packed into 8 large bags and 4 boxes. Every step was deliberate, almost ceremonial. I was reclaiming my space piece by piece, my home, my sanctuary. The concierge had seen the tension build over the past weeks. I called him from my apartment. "Hi, Tom. This is Sophia Johnson from 1204. Mark will be picking up his things, but he is no longer a resident. Please do not grant him elevator access. His key fob is deactivated." "Got it, Ms. Foster," he replied. "Sorry to hear it." I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat on my sofa, Pascal curling beside me, listening to the city's quiet hum. Then the messages started. Dozens of texts from Zara, Mark's friend, demanding explanations, pleading and threatening. Emails arrived, claiming items I legally owned were wrongfully withheld. I ignored them. Calm clarity had replaced fear. The next morning, I checked my social media anonymously. His latest TikTok was live, staged tears, a dramatic recounting of our fallout, clips showing him pretending to be the victim. My stomach turned, but I noticed the cracks, inconsistencies, dates, receipts, prior posts. They all pointed to the truth. He had weaponized my life, not the other way around. I began gathering evidence methodically. Screenshots of every post, every comment, every subtle manipulation, receipts, timestamps, emails, all proof of the reality he had tried to disguise. I wasn't just reclaiming my home. I was reclaiming the narrative. For the first time in months, I felt power. Not vindictive, not vengeful, but power. I had my sanctuary, my cat, my passions, and now a strategy. Every detail of Mark manipulations was documented, every lie traceable. I stood in my office that evening, Pascal purring softly on my lap, synthesizer humming quietly. The apartment was finally mine again, quiet, structured, and free of someone else's constant gaze. I had survived the subtle manipulations, endured the public humiliation, and emerged prepared. But I knew this was only the beginning. The storm had not passed, it had merely shifted. Mark's next move would be more desperate, more public, and I had to be ready, not just to defend my space, but my life, my reputation, my sanity. As I closed the office door, I whispered to Pascal, almost as much to myself, "This ends on my terms, not his, not anyone else's, mine." The morning after reclaiming my apartment, my phone began to buzz incessantly. Not Mark, he was blocked, but his friend Zara. Dozens of texts demanding answers, pleading and threatening. My stomach churned at the relentless intrusion, but I didn't respond. I had learned the hard way that reaction was fuel for their performance. Then came the emails. First from Mark himself, then from his mother, a narrative I hadn't even seen coming. They painted me as cold, controlling, a villain who had illegally thrown him out and taken his possessions. I read through them with a calm detachment, each claim more absurd than the last. Stolen electronics, confiscated furniture, emotional damages for ruined careers. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel a flicker of panic, but then I remembered something fundamental. Every word they were spinning had already been documented. Every staged TikTok, every manipulated photo, every exaggerated email. They were a map of their own lies. I began meticulously gathering evidence. Screenshots of social media posts, receipts for furniture, emails confirming ownership, timestamps proving who had moved what, and even casual content Mark had posted months earlier that contradicted his current claims. Every detail was recorded, cataloged, and backed up. By the evening, I had a full dossier, organized, precise, undeniable. I called my sister, a lawyer who had always been my anchor in family disputes. "Sophia, listen," she said, her voice calm but firm. "They've painted you as the villain, yes, but you have proof. We'll structure it legally, and you will turn their narrative inside out." The next day, the real storm began. 2 police officers arrived at my building, a younger man and a seasoned woman, Officer Benteen. They had received a complaint claiming I was holding Mark possessions hostage, particularly a family heirloom, a small antique armoire which had been in my family for decades. I walked them through the apartment, calmly presenting receipts, emails, and photos. "This is mine," I said, gesturing to the armoire. "This was delivered to my condo decades ago. Everything else you see that belonged to Mark has already been returned. His property is not here." Officer Benteen nodded, her expression unreadable but professional. "Sir, or ma'am," she began, "this is a civil matter, not criminal. We can't seize items in a dispute over ownership." "Exactly," I replied, "but I have evidence that his claim is retaliatory and part of a pattern of harassment." She glanced at the folder I handed her. TikTok videos, screenshots of staged posts, emails where Mark and Zara detailed manipulations and fabricated claims. Her eyes flickered with a hint of disbelief. "Well," she said, "this is meticulous. Keep everything." The public spectacle escalated online. Mark TikToks and Instagram stories spun me as controlling, cruel, and unfeeling. Hashtags like #JusticeForMark trended, and his followers sent threats and insults. But I didn't panic. I responded strategically. Each post, each false claim, each manipulated story was countered with evidence ready to present to authorities or the courts. I also hired a lawyer, Alani, whose reputation for precision and ruthlessness mirrored my own methodical mindset. She reviewed everything: social media posts, receipts, timestamps, emails, and documented harassment. "Sophia," she said, leaning back in her office chair, "they've built an entire brand on lies, but they've documented those lies too meticulously. We'll use their content against them. Every staged video, every caption, every hashtag will prove intent and defamation." Weeks turned into a month of legal maneuvering. Mark escalated, sending emails, threatening lawsuits, trying to enlist friends and family to pressure me. But every step was calculated, every move anticipated. My calm, structured life, once disrupted, was now my greatest weapon. Finally, the emails stopped, replaced by formal legal documents acknowledging that Mark claims were baseless. The restraining orders, cease and desist letters, and eventual court rulings confirmed the obvious. The narrative had been inverted. The abuser was exposed, the manipulations laid bare, and my life, quiet, structured, reclaimed, remained intact. Sitting in my office, Pascal curled beside me, the synthesizer humming softly, I felt a profound relief. Not victory in the sense of revenge, but clarity. I had survived psychological manipulation, public defamation, and the theater of someone else's ego, and I had emerged not just intact, but strategically empowered. The storm had passed, leaving behind a quieter, calmer world. My boundaries, once blurred and manipulated, were now clearly drawn, and for the first time in a long time, I could breathe and live freely. 6 months had passed since that first TikTok, the one that made my private life a public spectacle. The whirlwind of harassment, defamation, and legal threats had finally settled into quiet clarity. My apartment was once again my sanctuary, Pascal curled up on my dark blue couch, soft hums of the synth in the corner. I had sold the vintage synth, not because I wanted to, but because it reminded me of the turmoil, the subtle public shaming, the feeling of being turned into a project for someone else's audience. Yet I did so with purpose, using the proceeds to fund the first half of my lawyer's retainer. Every action was deliberate, every step forward intentional. Mark's campaign of manipulation and defamation had crumbled under its own weight. The public narrative had inverted. His staged videos, exaggerations, and pleas of victimhood were exposed as fabrications. His social media accounts went silent, his influence waned, and the army of followers who had rallied to his cause disappeared as quickly as they had gathered. I had boundaries now, ironclad and non-negotiable. No one, friend, ex, or stranger, could dictate my home, my passions, or my personal space again. The lessons were hard won. Clarity, strategy, and self-trust were more powerful than fear, shame, or public pressure. I spent long evenings in the apartment, Pascal by my side, reassembling my life. I rebuilt my workspace, free from prying lenses and aesthetic expectations. I returned to my mechanical keyboards, each keycap and switch a small act of quiet rebellion and self-expression. For the first time in months, I breathed without tension, without calculation, without performing for anyone but myself. Emotionally, I felt transformed. The Sophia who had once silently acquiesced to subtle manipulations was gone. In her place stood a woman who had learned the power of meticulous planning, patience, and strategic action. A woman who understood that personal boundaries were sacred, that autonomy was non-negotiable, and that even in a world hungry for spectacle, the truth could prevail if wielded wisely. I thought about the storm, the harassment, the legal threats, the social media spectacle, and I realized I had grown stronger, not in spite of it, but because I had navigated it with clarity, patience, and calm. I hadn't reacted impulsively. I had strategized, documented, and acted decisively. And that made all the difference. Life resumed its quiet rhythm. Pascal purred in the soft light of the living room. I typed at my keyboard, rearranging switches, enjoying the subtle click-clack that had always grounded me. Outside, the city hummed softly, indifferent, unjudging. My life was my own again. No stages, no cameras, no performances. I smiled to myself, a small private smile, one that belonged to me and me alone. For the first time in a long while, I felt complete. The storm had passed. My sanctuary was restored. And for Sophia Johnson, 33, data analyst, cat lover, and quiet observer of life, the curtain had finally closed.